Hello, and welcome to the Gauntlet Podcast. Each month, we take a look back at games played by Gauntlet folks. Hey, my name is Lowell, and I use he, him pronouns. I'm joined today by my co-host, Shane. Shane, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. I'm recording today from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and sovereignty was never ceded, and I use she and her pronouns.
Excellent. And today, we are joined by Mads, who is an avid performer and game facilitator, a really excellent all-around person who's done a ton of stuff. So I'm just gonna say that. Mads, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much for having me today. I appreciate it.
Well, it's a delight. You know, I always see your name pop up in things. You play a ton of interesting things. Shane, do you want to tell the story about the number of games?
Well, I've always had this thing that, no matter how many games I think I've run, Lowell has always run more. And I come to the podcast and I look at the planning document and I count how many games I've got, and I've never had as many as Lowell. And this month, finally, the first time ever, I played more games than Lowell Francis. But you have just put us both to shame. You have,
Yes.
you have played as many games as the two of us put together, pretty much. So, no real sense of achievement, but still, good to have you here.
It is excellent. So, listeners, for our first segment, each of us is going to talk about the RPGs that we played in the last couple of months in recent times, which is sort of September, October, early November as we're talking about this. And we're going to talk about, in depth, one game that we played during that period. Shane, how was this September, October, wild November period that we're in?
Well, look, there's very different answers depending on which part of that period we're talking about. So, September was an outstanding gaming month for me. Everything was going so well. It just felt like things were flowing. I was really excited about everything I was playing. That, started to roll over into October, but then mid to late October, I got COVID, and that really brought everything crashing to a stop. But what did I play? Off Gauntlet, I ran some Masks and Good Society, and I got to play in games of Apocalypse World, External Containment Bureau, and Joust with Spirit, which was a playtest of the new Story Brewers game Fight with Spirit, which is about like sports anime, teen sports drama. But we were medieval squires in a jousting tournament. That was absolutely fantastic. On Gauntlet, I finished up my quarterly of The Twilight Throne, Ray Najati's new game. That is so good. I have the High Ground, played a few sessions of that. I was really excited about it. It's a short game, it probably takes about an hour or so, including setup, where you and one other person play through just the banter and flirtation and jockeying for position before a big duel. Played Aegon, played a one-shot of This Party Sucks, a game about a young queer person trying to get over their ex by going to a series of disappointing parties. An amazing time. Ran a couple of sessions of Absurdia, which is a PBTA game inspired by things like, Welcome to Night Vale, that kind of vibe. That was one that got hit by my COVID situation, but seemed really promising. I'd like to play more of it. And what else? I'm sorry, did you say Street Magic? I had a one-shot of that. And Songs for the Dusk, which is the game that I'm going to talk about more. So Songs for the Dusk is a Forged in the Dark game by Kavita Pajuri. It's kind of a solar punk or hope punk type game. I've never used either of those words before, but I hope that some of our listeners sort of know what I'm talking about. So it's still in development. We played version 0.6. It is set in the distant future, many, many generations after an apocalypse has reshaped the world. Humanity is rebuilding in these quite varied small communities across a continent using a combination of different social structures and technologies. Some pretty archaic, some extremely advanced. There's also magic, and our characters are crews of striders who are adventurers driven by bravery and compassion, and who are very much rooted in their particular community and will be sort of growing and developing that community through their adventures. So some things that worked for me. The first one, again, going back to my possible misuse of hope punk and solar punk as adjectives here, the tone is really great. That optimistic, hopeful, compassionate tone was really fun to play with, especially with Forged in the Dark mechanics, where I think a lot of the games inspired by Blades of the Dark do tend to be quite bleak, so it was a real tonal shift, I think, from a lot of those games. And especially because I was just coming off the Twilight Throne Quarterly, which is the most horrifying intrigue game possible. And I thought it would be nice to sort of cushion that landing with a much nicer, which I don't say to, disparage the Twilight Throne in any way, but a much nicer time with Songs to the Dusk. And it was exciting for all of us to focus our creativity in the game on things that fit that sort of tone. So what can we have that is dangerous and exciting, but still positive and upbeat and community focused? That's something I haven't done a lot of in games, and it was exciting to me both as something new, but also just something that is fun and cool to do in its own right. So, in other games, I've created some absolutely horrifying devil's bargains, but in this game, we got to have, well, it's called a Lotus Gambit in this game, but it's the same sort of premise. Things like, you now have the problem that holograms appear around you displaying your emotions at inconvenient moments, which was pretty fun to play with. And the game does a great job of nailing that tone and supporting you to play through it. And I do want to stray over sort of more broadly into what works for me about Forged in the Dark games generally, because I am pretty new to them. Twilight Throne was really the first Forged in the Dark game that I played at any length or any depth. And a lot of what's fun in Songs to the Dark is about how effectively it uses the Forged in the Dark mechanics. I think that one of the big pleasures of role-playing games, something that we all get to enjoy, sorry, I'm just going to speak for the entire hobby now, is the surprising ways that the stories that we're telling or playing can shift just based on what catches the player's attention. And I think that this is true across a wide range of games. Like, you always see these memes or Reddit posts or tweets from, especially dungeon masters like playing 5e, where they're complaining that they did all this prep and then instead the players just spent 3 hours talking to some random goblin who they'd never even thought about. And it is, in a trad game, this sort of thing is a problem because of the way that prep works. But it's still really fun for everyone. So that's why, it keeps coming up. I think other kinds of story games support this different extents, but it's often not at the core of what they're doing. But Forged in the Dark is really effective at facilitating and encouraging those moments where the shifts in focus and attention and interest take you in surprising and interesting new directions. And that's to do with the way that all of the mechanics works together. Things like the flexibility of the action roll. I assume that about 99% of the people listening to this know what an action roll is, but I'm sorry to that one person out there who has no idea what I'm talking about. You message me on Twitter if it still exists by the time this episode comes out. The way you jump over your setup and then backfill it with flashbacks, and especially Devil's Bargains. They're all things that really support you to just follow and sort of flesh out a tangent and have it feel like meaty and interesting and weighty, which I really love. And so our game of Songs to the Dusk was developing along a few threads that were just the things the players had shown an interest in. One was this kind of thing about animals and baby dragons and the prospect of adopting some kind of pet, which I'm always a sucker for in any role-playing game. And the other was this sort of grand, sinister mystery of what one of the factions called the Hand of the Cocoon was really up to, and how that was linked to one of the characters' backstories. And the mechanics really gave us great tools to follow and develop those strands. What I'm less sure about, there are some specific things about Forged in the Dark games that don't really work for me. I really dislike how resistant rolls work. Both as a player and GM, I find them really awkward and intrusive, and I don't think they support the fiction well a lot of the time. I've argued with many Forged in the Dark enthusiasts about this, so I'm not trying to persuade anyone, just describing my experience. And just overall, I think I've come down on the side that Forged in the Dark is just a bit more crunchy than I like. And I do acknowledge that there is a big payoff at the table for all of that detail and complexity. So it's not a criticism of the system, but for me, Forged in the Dark is just more cognitive load than I want to take on in my hobby that I do to relax and have a good time. Something that is specific to Songs is that I wasn't always satisfied with the ways the mechanics supported something that I wanted from the game, which was the idea of developing the community that the PCs are part of. The main way that happens mechanically in the game is that characters can invest currency from their missions into foundations, which are mostly sort of resources and technological infrastructure in the community where they live. Things like, the community is well hidden or camouflaged, or they have a helicopter hangar, or, all kinds of things like this. But when I think about developing a community in the spirit of hope and optimism and, all of those things that we talked about in terms of tone, I think less about that sort of material development and more about different kinds of social development. And I didn't feel like I was getting that. So I would have loved to see the PCs, thinking about things like building a creche rather than a drop jet hangar, or deciding whether to make the community harder for enemies to find or to improve relationships between the farmers and the town guard, or, I would have liked to see those kinds of softer social foundations becoming part of the game's mechanics. But my takeaway from this is, this game absolutely ruled. Even though I've just said it's too complicated and I don't like the way the foundations work. Very likely that I'm going to talk about this game again when we do our favourite Games of the Year podcast. It was really a good time. If the premise, sort of blades in the dark but happy, sounds good to you, you should really check this out. I think you'll find a lot to like. One thing I have to say is I planned this as a quarterly series of 12 sessions, but COVID hit halfway through. I just haven't been able to get back to it, so it did come to an unhappy, incomplete ending. And I think that some of the appeal of Forged in the Dark is the way that a longer game develops and expands in. We didn't really get to see that, so that's something that I would have liked. But I am very excited to see how the game continues to develop. And despite my overall feelings about Forged in the Dark games, there's enough here I like that I do think I'll come back for a longer game sometime in the future.
Mads, what's your experience with Forged in the Dark?
Running Forged in the Dark, only The Hunted by Chris Bissett.
Okay.
Actually playing Forged in the Dark, we did not only Family of Blades, but I also did Haunter in the Dark, which is also a Forged in the Dark game as well.
What about you, Lowell? Have you played much Forged in the Dark?
Yeah, I ran a couple years of Blades in the Dark. I've run Scum and Villainy both on the Gauntlet and off. I've run Yoshinobi Vendetta, Sherry's Cyber Ninja game, and we actually played a few sessions of Songs for the Dusk, but we had to stop because there was an iteration of the rules that radically changed things, and Rich wanted to have the latest version, but it was also so much to do, and so we ended up stopping it. Here's the other thing you mentioned with Songs for the Dusk. I love games that have community building. We're going to see this when I talk about the game that I played, and I would love games that had more of those soft elements to them. Like Mutineer Zero has a big community building. That's like the point of the game, is to build up your location. But they're all very much build a farm, build a bar, build an arena, build a chicken coop. All these very, very stuff. It's but very little about the sense of other elements for the community. Can you build up, like Legacy Life Among the Ruins has a thing where when you do the Turning of the Age, you come up with a new custom or a new celebration for your community, and I love that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's cool.
Any other questions or thoughts, Mads, before we move on?
No, it sounds like a very interesting game, and this whole idea of being hopeful and optimistic, it's interesting as you say, for a Forged in the Dark game, like Blades in the Dark, but happy. The ones that I've played, let's see, The Hunted, Modern Folk Horror, Haunter in the Dark, Cthulhu-esque, Lovecraftian, and then Family of Blades. The 2 times that I actually played that game was actually in the spirit of A-Team or Leverage. So, there was some humor to it, but heisty and just could get really grim in certain spots if you weren't careful. But yeah, that was probably the other exception to my experience with Forged in the Dark. So yeah, it sounds like a fascinating game, and it would be interesting to try for sure.
So Mads, we've already sort of foreshadowed that we're going to hear a lot of games. Tell us about the games that you have played in this most recent period and what you want to talk about.
Okay, so off the Gauntlet, I played Our Final Gathering, The Between, A Family of Blades, The Hunted, Thirsty Sword Necromancers, Iron Sworn in co-op mode, Ghosts of El Paso, Trophy Dark, Cairn, the RPG, Good Society, the Lady Susan PI module, Haunter in the Dark, Monster Hearts 2, Cthulhu Dark, The Secret of Castro Negro, and Brindlewood Bay. In most cases, those were one-shots or two-shots or mini-series of some sort. And then on the Gauntlet, I ran Raging Grannies, Our Haunt, or I should say Our Haunt I was playing in a game with Sabine. Longtime listener, last time caller. I was able to play during GCOG, which is the open gaming event that the community holds. And I also have run Allura and Roommates Wanted, both rooted in trophy incursions that use the trophy dark mechanics. The game I want to discuss today is Roommates Wanted, which is the modern rooted in trophy dark incursion that was created by Dark Liquid Games. So it's modern folk horror using trophy dark mechanics. And the premise is you are invited to stay with a rich elderly recluse for 5 days. If it ends up not working out, he pays you $10,000. But there are other non-human tenants sharing your spaces. So the theme is about tenants. There's content warnings about rats and debt and money. And this incursion was written as part of the Trophy Trifolds Session 2 Game Jam. So it's compactly written in a brochure format. It's essentially on an 8.5 by 11 inch piece of paper. And yeah, it's just like folded up and, double-sided. And that's it. That's all you get. And it's really nicely written for something that's done in such a compressed manner. What worked for me? In general, I love Trophy Dark. The vibe of psychological horror, mostly with the potential for body horror, is amazing. I had actually picked this up when I was on my binge of looking for more Trophy Dark. I mean, I have the core book PDF, so we have the basic Trophy Dark game with all the different incursions that come with the game. But I'm a willful child. It's suggested that you're supposed to start with Flocculent Cathedral, as your first incursion that you run, and I didn't do that. My first Trophy Dark incursion that I ran actually was Allura by Alicia Furness, and that's futuristic sci-fi horror in the Trophy Dark mechanics. Mm-hmm. So this one was something that I picked up again because I was just trying to find as many Trophy Dark incursions that I could. And I really enjoyed just reading the premise because I could see a lot of these scenes in my head. Like it takes you, instead of the rings format, the ring structure that Trophy Dark normally has, it has it in days. So again, you're spending 5 days with this fella. And then each day has its own temptations and terrors and moments and things that could happen to the tenants or happen while they're there at this place. So that was very, again, things that I could see as if it was in a movie, and I wanted to convey that to the players. So I'm a fan of creepy and spooky stuff in modern settings. We think that technology and life amenities and comforts will save or protect us, but I'm pretty sure that horror is possible in many different degrees everywhere. So many of the moments and conditions that are listed in this game, I could see as happening in a slow burn horror movie in the style of Session 9, as well as the Touchstone Vivarium, which is mentioned as inspiration for the game. And then, as always, the collaborative nature of Trophy allows for a build out of the atmosphere based on what the players narrate. And the option of the Devil's Bargains just, the no matter what's, just builds on that. And it's like Shane said when talking about the other game, which is the whole idea of the story that's built out based on what catches the player's attention. That's one of the reasons why I really enjoy Trophy and Trophy Dark. So with this game, what I'm less sure about, no rituals. One of the ways that Ruin in Trophy is built, the counter that ticks away in-game for the characters being lost to the environment, the ways that Ruin is racked up quickly and the tension mounts is by use of the rituals, the magic, more than just skills. It's something that special that the characters can do. But I asked Andrew, the designer, if this was deliberate, not having any rituals in the game. And he said yes, he confirmed it. Because he said it was a modern setting, he didn't feel that any of the core Trophy rituals fit. But I was welcome to add some if I thought that it needed it. And I was considering it, but I ended up not doing it. I wanted to take on the challenge of trying to run the game, seeing what it was like without having that little, I'm not going to say crutch, but I mean, it is something that just, again, ramps up the tension. it's like so special. It's an important moment for the characters, and then it could go real badly when they use a ritual. But I decided not to. I wanted to take on that challenge. And then wishing that I had done it because I didn't ramp up the tension for everyone as much as I wanted to by Ring 5. I think one player, just by virtue of their character being like a spoiled rich kid and just managing to roll badly while also being a complete and utter shit. I hope I can say that on tape.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Just by virtue of that, like the character managed to ramp up a lot faster than everybody else, even without rituals. But it worked out because I also tend to think cinematically about things in terms of scene setting and cutting away from character to character. But sometimes conveying the cinematic scenes to cause progress, I guess, with the characters and to also ramp up each of their tension, ramp up each of the horror. It may not happen effectively because I'm also trying to listen to the players' responses to the environment and what I throw at them. And they veer any which way. So while I'm reacting to what they're saying, sometimes maybe they didn't take that left turn that I was expecting, and then it doesn't. I either forget to give them some ruin, like you saw something horrible, but it's okay. Your character is used to it because you like spiders, so it's not like as big of a deal as if it was somebody else that had seen whatever it was. So again, it's like that was one of the things that I was like, oh, I don't know about this, but we're just going to keep continuing on. So I had split it up into 2 parts. It was a 2-shot. We did day 1 and day 2 in the first one, and then the remaining days in the second part of the series. So the takeaway from this game was, to me, from a keeper perspective, it bears more consideration than a core trophy dark incursion because of the lack of rituals. You have to really take into account what moments can I put in here? What part of the terrors can I show them or have them experience to be able to push them towards their ruin just as if they had rituals to utilize? So it requires a little bit more forethought. And my players know I'm a pantser, so I tend not to go with a lot of prep. I mean, like I read through it once and then I'm going like, yeah, I know what scenes I'm going to pull out of my butt. And so this one, again, required a little bit more forethought than I actually did. But my players still said that they had a good time and felt appropriately creeped out. So there's that satisfaction. I mean, like, at least if everybody was having a good time with it, enjoying the horror, however it was presented, then I did a good job. And I have to be satisfied with that, even though it's like, oh, I wanted you to really feel creeped out. I wanted you to feel like you were in a movie. Dang. But again, it was one of what I would consider my meh kind of jamming experiences, as opposed to, oh, I really drove it into them and I really made sure that they had a roller coaster time. So I just have to remember, it's not always going to be a roller coaster ride. It's not always going to be all stars and no wishes, It's just gotta be happy with, hey, they had a good time and they enjoyed themselves. And that's the important part.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is true. Like, you do have to kind of accept that reality as a GM. I'm very sorry that you didn't enjoy this. I think it's my favorite trophy dark incursion. I've run it a bunch of times. I do have my own set of rituals for it, so maybe that helped. But partly what makes it my favorite and why I enjoy running it is that my day job, I'm a tenant advocate, so I help tenants in Melbourne deal with problems with their landlord. So plenty of personal experience to bring to bear on the terrifying, strange landlord behaviours of this incursion. So yeah, I really like it.
That's
I mean,
great.
it's not like I didn't enjoy it. It's just like I just felt a little bit more pressure because, this wasn't as easy as I would normally do it if I had one of the other incursions that I ran or something like that. I don't know what it was. It just felt like, should have worked a little bit harder. But I mean, again, just pulling out what was from my head and then presenting it to the players and to make sure that they could see what I saw and experience what I was trying to convey. I mean, it just felt like, it fell a little short every once in a while. But again, just have to be happy from where it was. That's what I have to remember.
Yeah, it's very easy to naysay. I'm always questioning those things. That is an interesting point you made about the idea of the structure and the play of the game, maybe because your approach not as well working with like the more cinematic techniques that you might want, like intercutting and cross-cutting and things like that. I think that's really interesting.
It's also one of the few times that I have run a trophy incursion that I had 4 players, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to run it as a 2-shot. If you had 2 players, you can totally do it as a 1-shot, no problem. You could fit all 5 rings into one session. But if you have 3 or more, you don't want more than 4. If you have 3 to 4, you should split it up. I mean, Jason Cordova had said, if you have 3 to 4 players, it's like usually best to split it up. So you have rings 1 and 2 in the first segment, especially if you're working on character creation as well. And then if you have the remaining rings in the second part. And it was actually like really funny because I ran Roommates Wanted as a gauntlet game on the calendar, and I had a couple of people like drop. I mean, like, Shane unfortunately had to drop because of being sick. And then I had somebody drop like literally like maybe the day or like the morning of. And I'm like, oh my God, what do I do? What do I do? And then I realized it's like that I had somebody on the waiting list still. And like 5 or 10 minutes before we started, I said, are you up? Can you play? And he just jumped on board and he just quickly created a character while everybody else introduced themselves. It was amazing.
Nice. I love those kinds of experiences.
Absolutely.
So let me talk about my time as well. Off Gauntlet, we played Dune, 13th Age, Mage PBTA, Apocalypse Keys. And then on Gauntlet, I did Crescendo of Violence, which is the new Osprey Neon Noir game. Swords of the Serpentine, which I'm still running right now. The Veil Iterations, which is the playtest I'm doing of my slight rewrite of the Veil. We're about 13 sessions into that. Fading Suns, which I wrote as Padding Suns, which I'm imagining is some sort of a Paddington Fading Suns crossover. I ran some and played some stuff for GCOG, but the game that I want to talk about is one that I didn't run, but played, and that is Stonetop, which I expect some people will know what this is. It is a fantasy RPG that is centered on an Iron Age village community, and it's written by Jeremy Strandberg. For base mechanics, it draws heavily on Dungeon World. Think Dungeon World with even more character options within the playbooks. And I should say, I have run Dungeon World. I ran stuff for Magpie, Anglekite, and Varkith at cons and things. But I don't love Dungeon World. Like, it's not necessarily my bag. But to go back to what Stonetop does, we've got that sort of fantasy adventures, but Iron Age. But the more important part for me is that the village itself is a major part of play. It has its own playbooks. It has its own mechanics. It has seasonal actions. It has subsystems. That seasonal approach means that you're making rolls to help determine events and investing back in the village and trying to get surpluses and build things up and have positive growth so that the village itself grows. It creates a set of events that the players respond to, and you don't play out the full season. You kind of choose the sort of highlight moments and then move on. It is definitely low fantasy. Iron Age, think Harn or a less fantastic version of Glorantha, which means that it's got that sort of very Iron Age approach to what the settlements are, what the steads are, what the economy is that's going on there. It's also a human-focused game. There are fair folk that are sort of fading from the world, and there are monstrous creatures and peoples out there, but generally it's a human-centered game. What worked for me? I said this earlier, and I love, love, love community building. Like, this is absolutely my jam. This is why I love Legacy, Free from the Yoke, why Mutant Year Zero is really interesting to me. Any kind of game that has community building, especially with interesting choices and details that you can sink your teeth into. And there's a lot. There's kind of a sketch map of the village, and you can put your, like, where you live on it. I love that. And there's lots of different choices, and you come up with NPCs and you keep track of those. And I adore that kind of thing. And that is complemented here by a very robust session 0/setup process. Like, you're making a lot of choices about the village. You're making choices about your characters. You're figuring out how your characters fit within the role of the village. I mean, everybody has to work. Everybody has to have something that they do. And that creates some interesting choices because, like, even if you're a lone wolf or kind of an outsider, you still have to have a place and a role in the village. For example, Mario ran a character who was sort of a ritualist who had kind of failed at a ritual and was kind of on the outs, but they still had to carry out the important sort of Hearth rituals, and there was tension about that. And that was really, really cool. And even my sort of ranger character, I had to figure out how I fit into the village, like what I did, why I was welcome there, what responsibilities I had. So really, really interesting stuff there. I do want to talk about actually the specifics of this game. Ryberg put all of this together. I mean, this is just a 4-shot game, and there's a ton of stuff. And Rye put together a character keeper with tons of tabs and lots of details, because this is a really detail-rich, complicated game. But he got it so that we were able to maneuver through and make choices. He taught us the rules. He managed in those 4 sessions to give us a really satisfying story. Like, we played, that first session was mostly session 0 with a little bit of a kind of an interesting startup hook based on some choices that we'd made. And then we had 2 sessions of our group going out to fix a problem and then come back. And that 4th session was kind of the fallout from that, how our relationships had been strained. Like, Matt's character had gone out on this adventure. His wife didn't want him to, and in fact said, I don't want you to go and do this. And so that 4th session, a lot of the sort of character dynamics was about trying to reconcile with his wife over having made this choice. It was really interesting because then we had other problems that like forced us to get in the middle of that. It was really good. And Rye did a great job building on what the players brought to the table. Like, I'm going to say honestly, I couldn't have run this. I would have had to had a book. I couldn't have run for the PDF. Rye took it in, synthesized it, and brought it to the table in a way I'm fairly certain I couldn't have. With that as well, we had great player choices. Matt Dowdy and Horst and Mario. Good characters that were doing things that when they did them, they weren't what I expected them to choose. And at first I was like, I don't understand why they've made this choice. But then they would show me through play why they had made that decision, what their characters' values were that had brought them to there. And it was really good. Like, I love that surprise that you can get as a player. And so I really enjoyed that. I ran a ranger, which is kind of, a starter character because I got a dog out of having a pet, so, but it was still really interesting because I wasn't just a ranger. I was a huntswoman, and I had to roll for helping the village with supplies and things like that. I will say this, there are a lot of moves in these playbooks. There are a lot of them. And at first, when I looked at the Ranger's playbook, I was like, oh my Lord, I have no idea. And sometimes when you get playbooks with a lot of moves, you look through and you're like, okay, I can see that these moves are either kind of just making certain things better or maybe a little bit weaker or go things. I had a really hard time choosing. Like the Ranger playbook, I could have run my character with any of those moves. I would have done it, and I would have found it interesting. What I'm a little bit less sure about with Stonetop, and I want to mention that Stonetop is kind of in process right now. It was kickstarted. They had hoped to have it out October of last year, but they're still working on it. In fact, like while we were playing, they made a change to a basic move. So they're still really in development and working along, though the play packet that's out is incredibly robust. What I'm less certain about, this is an Iron Age game, and it is a medieval European style Iron Age game. There is a lot of cultural baggage with that. There's a lot of assumptions about what the economies are and how players interact there. I haven't read through the full thing, but I hope that there's some material talking about how the economy might look different, how you might play this out in a different kind of setting. I think that would be really interesting because Iron Age society, say, in the Pacific Islands or in China or North Africa is very different from medieval. So we have that kind of as our default template. I'd love to be able to see that with different kinds of settings or having those baked in to make those different choices. That's one thing I'm less sure about. The other thing is, holy shit, there's a lot of mechanics. I mean, there are a lot of moves for a lot of different situations, and I do not think that I have a handle on the game after 4 sessions. It's a lot. It's not like any individual piece is that complicated, but when you've got so many pieces, like Horst had this whole thing with like a whole system for artifacts and rituals and things like that I saw him working with it, and I was like, I have no idea what's going on here. Arcana and stuff, and then you did something, and now you've got a storm going, okay. I was very glad that Matt Dowdy was a blacksmith with a shield, because that I got. Like, that I understood. So some interesting things there, but I kind of got a little bit lost. I should say, my experience is a 4-session experience. It is a very narrow slice of this game, which has a playbook and then a setting book. So we didn't get to a lot. So that's, again, I'm literally less sure about it because I haven't seen it. So I have questions on that. And as I said, I wouldn't want to run this without a final printed version. Here's a little thing, my last little point. It takes a lot of points to go up a level in this game. You level, and then you get a move. It takes a lot of points. I think 8, and then more after first level. It takes more points. And you get XP on a miss, and there's some end of session XP. It has a mechanic that you can spend your XP to give a bonus to a roll after you've rolled. And while it helped, like in a couple of situations, it also meant that I didn't level where the other people did because I spent some on that roll. I'm never certain about those mechanics where you have the opportunity to spend your XP to do things. Like, it helps in the moment, but it also feels unsatisfying in the end. So that's a little bit of me being, having a hobby horse. But overall, I like it. I think it's really interesting. I think I would not do this as a person's first game. I think I would want to do it with people who've played a lot of PBTA. I think I would love to steal all of the community building things out for other games. But I'm not going to do any of that until we have a final version, a final printed copy, because I need the book in my hand to be able to grok what's going on. That being said, I'm really excited to see the final version. Questions? Thoughts?
I mean, it's just funny how sort of similar in so many ways the games that you and I talked about were. They're both very substantial but still in development, quite complicated story games about adventurers who are trying to build up the community they live in. And then Mads is almost the opposite, a pamphlet that's all in one house and terrible things happening to selfish people.
Pretty much.
The real spectrum of RPG experiences.
Yes.
I think it sounds a lot like, well, when I first picked up Ironsworn with my gaming partner, Rob, he had to convince me to start it because I was like, I don't know if I want to, do a low fantasy game. I mean, Iron Age, I don't know about this. But he said, it's like, just give it a shot. And it sounds like a lot of what I was getting used to in that game, which was a lot of moves. I mean, like nothing specific to the characters, although they had paths and the different pieces that you could pick out as your moves. But then the game moves for the questing, for the journey, for the facing danger and battling and all this kind of stuff. I mean, like, it just sounds like a lot of that. And then I remember looking at the character keeper and feeling very overwhelmed because all the moves are there and separated out by like section and just feeling like, am I going to get this or not? Mm-hmm. And then this leveling thing too. I mean, that's weird that I've never heard that before of like spending the XP towards your roll, to improve it. And with Ironsworn, I'm like, I don't think we leveled since probably our first session or second session because of the way our journey has built out that, you're only supposed to get XP like when you hit a waypoint or something like that. And it's like, we've hit so many weird points that I'm not even sure if like we can like sufficiently stop to get XP. So, I mean, it just sounds very involved. But I can say that a lot of people on my Discord server are very interested in this game. So I'm sure they're going to be highly interested in listening to this episode when you talk about Stonetop. That's amazing, though. I mean, like, that even for all your experience, like, to see all the moves that you had and then not necessarily get a complete handle on what everybody else was doing because they also had a ton of moves on their sheet as well. Ooh.
It was a lot. Listeners, in our second segment, we have our guest, Mads, bring a topic to us to talk about a topic of their choice. Mads, what is it that you would like to talk about today?
I actually brought up 3 topics, but Shane had propped for one of them. So the one that I was going to bring up today was about games that companion well together. Back in the summer, when I started playing with different folks and like trying to set up my own games outside of Gauntlet or within Gauntlet and such, I had played Heroes of the Hearth from the Seven Wonders collection in Gauntlet, and then thought, wow, these characters, this game is like so fascinating, and it's like it would be very cool. And I think our host, our GM had, or facilitator, I should say, because it is truly a GM-less game where the facilitator is one of the characters, and that's one of the reasons why I like it so much. The facilitator had actually brought up, hey, you know what, this would be interesting to play, and then we see the other side of it by playing a different game. So Heroes of the Hearth is, of course, about the villagers who are left behind as their adventurers go out to face some looming world threat. And then it goes through their time in the village where the threat comes upon them in the climax and at the end. And then each of these villages are associated with a particular adventurer that they talk about, think about, what have you. And it was proposed that, like, for the companion game, then we look at what the adventurers were doing while the villagers were going through their, you know, whatever they were going through. And I thought that was so fascinating. So I had set up a Heroes of the Hearth, and I really wanted to work on this because I felt like some places we could have sped through a little bit faster to make sure we got to the meat of the story. When we played it for the Gauntlet, I think we were missing some parts, or we kind of like skimmed through like an act or two because we ran out of time. So I kind of like tried to streamline that a little bit. We played Heroes of the Hearth, we played our villagers, and then when we did it in a different game, we did Venture to show what a couple of those adventurers had been doing in service to facing the threat. It was a really great time, and it was fun to become a different character, but still kind of calling upon what happened in the previous game in Heroes of the Hearth. It's like them remembering, like my bard remembered her son who was left in the village and was played by somebody else. And then the rogue that was with me, like, you know, as part of our covert team, was associated with the, not the head of the village, but like, you know, the one who was the organizer of all. And just like, you know, what did he think? I mean, like, you know, and how did it compare to what his betrothed thought back in the village? So just a different shift of perspective. And it was great to do that and just be able to see how these games could kind of dovetail. And then David MK had actually done something very similar in the Gauntlet calendar, where he started us with For the Queen. We created our characters in the For the Queen setup. And then we continued these characters in a hack. I'm going to say it's a hack because we didn't play it completely correctly.
Right.
Rules as written. A hack of Hillfolk using the drama system. And I think that was really successful. We told a very short slice of the story developed from these characters that we created in For the Queen. Another great example of just being able to carry over like the scenario or characters or, you know, looking at a different perspective. Just 2 games that seem to dovetail well together or seem to fit as pieces of a whole, I would say.
That's really interesting. When you mentioned that you might want to talk about games that companion well together, I was not thinking about games where you could kind of carry over a set of characters from one to the other. I was thinking about games that would complement each other in different ways. And one that's like, far from original thought of mine, like lots of people do this, is using a world-building game to create a setting that you'll then play through another game in. So I've done that a few times with, did you say Street Magic, which is about building a city. We use that to make settings for Thirsty Sword Lesbians, and we also did it during our run of Songs for the Dusk, actually. And that works really well. One idea that I've had, but never actually brought to the table, is I have this Monster Hearts setup that I've run a few times where the characters are, it's the 80s, the characters are members of a D&D club, so they're emotional teenage monsters who hate and want to sleep with each other, and they're playing D&D. And I've always thought, like, the extra step that I've always wanted to introduce to this is that we would alternate with a fantasy game where we would, like, play out the adventures that their characters have and, like, go back and forth between the two, like maybe World of Dungeons or something like that. So I really like that idea as well. I think that would be really fun.
That's awesome.
And, sorry, I'm monologuing. Lol, I'll let you get a word in just a sec. But the other thing that I think would be really cool is, and have been excited about, is with all the new, like, carved from Brindlewood games that are coming out, I feel like soon I'm going to be able to run this, like, epic year-long campaign where we start with the Between and we play out a campaign of the Between, and then the mastermind or the dark conspiracy or whoever it is carries over into, like, the 1940s Carved from Brindlewood game, and then, they have to deal with the same mastermind, and then we play out, the 1970s Arkham Horror version of the same threat. Like, it builds, and finally Brindlewood Bay has, the Mavens have to finally put to rest whatever has been lurking since Victorian London. That sort of idea is really appealing to me.
Sorry.
Yeah.
It sounds so amazing. That would be so cool.
I have done probably 12.5 campaigns with Microscope, both Microscope used for world building and for city building. I've done that with actually to cover the interstices in a superhero game for what happened between the first campaign and the second one. I've used it for 13th Age, for a bunch of stuff I really love. I've done it on the Gauntlet before. I love Microscope and world building. One time I did a set of 3 world building games. We did Microscope, and then we did a little game I wrote about generating a fantasy Tarot for a world. And then we did Kingdom, all kind of building on one another in that same setting. The 2 ideas that I've had for this kind of thing that I've been thinking about, one of them very seriously, one of them I thought about, but I haven't figured out how to do it. But doing some kind of a low fantasy game like Stonetop or something like that, with a different system, with a lighter system. But with the idea that, like in the world of Glorantha and fantasy games, sometimes these characters have to go out on hero quests and go kind of into the mythic plane to meet with gods and stories and things like that and bring back those things to the world. And you would do a very kind of crunchy Iron Age base game, but then you would use Aegon to do the journey up into the mythic sphere. And what you brought back, we would become metaphorical for, okay, you brought back fire. Well, that means the season's harvest is going to be great, that kind of thing. I think that would be really dynamite. I have to figure out how to do it. The other game I wanted to do, this is a dumb idea, but I still love it. I want to do a worldwide wrestling game where it's very much luchadore kind of worldwide wrestling and do that whole thing. But then the side gig is that, in fact, these luchadors, they are also monster hunters, like the classic Mexican luchador things. And so you'd swap between worldwide wrestling and Monster of the Week. And, you do the scene in El Paso, but then you'd have to go and hunt down, the El Paso demon in between. And the tensions from the matches would get carried over into the tensions between the monster hunters. It's an idea. I'm not sure it would pay off as well as I think it would, but it is one that I've always had in my head.
It's beautiful. Oh my God. You've got to try that. I mean, at the very least, it's like, do some sort of, I don't know, like a 4-shot here and a 4-shot there, or like intersperse the Monster of the Week in with the worldwide wrestling, and then just be able to see how that kind of plays out. It's like, and for the interlude, or meanwhile, it's like that kind of thing going on. I mean, like, that would be so amazing. Ooh, I love these ideas. My gosh.
This reminds me something that I've thought about for Worldwide Wrestling as well, which is a different approach to the idea of games companioning with each other, is to try and find another GM who would run a separate game of Worldwide Wrestling at the same time that I was running it, like each week sessions at the same time, and they would represent two rival wrestling promotions. And because they're at the same time, like players, wrestlers could leap from one promotion to the other. They could, invade, attack each other, all kinds of things like that.
Oh my God!
I think that would be really fun.
God. Oh, well, that just kind of leads to like one of the old ideas that I had when I used to do more trad games. I wasn't sure which system I was going to do because I've done D&D and I've also done Pathfinder First Edition. And one of the things that was in my head was having someone run, well, actually like two separate DMs running two separate parties. One party was captured by the big bad, and then the other party is the one that's been sent to rescue them, and then like have them like, misunderstandings coming together, seeing if they're going to take out the big bad, and then it gets much worse from there. How much worse? I don't know. Like it would have depended upon the imagination and how contentious they would have been when they met, basically. But again, that was like kind of like a dream to be able to kind of coordinate like two separate groups like going at the same time.
I managed a game room for a store back in the 90s, and I was running 3 parallel fantasy campaigns set in the same setting, and it went on, and after about a year and a half, they all arrived at the same place, and I did a massive 18-person session where the characters all got to meet each other and share information and give plans and things like that. And people brought food and it was a big feast and things. It was, though, that was the most high wire acts to get that coordinated. It was wild. And actually we had some players swap groups after the meeting. It was really interesting.
That is amazing.
But it was a lot of work.
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, and then another idea that I had kind of like similar to Shane's was have a mystery start in Brindlewood Bay, and then it turned even weirder or, took a different type of turn that they would need to call upon a crew from Paranormal Incorporated. They would need to call upon Paranormal Incorporated to help them out. Basically, it's like it wasn't just a murder mystery anymore. Now it involved the person's ghost. Oh, shit.
Think about a game that's like a parallel to It, where you run mysteries like with kids, and then you come back 20 years later, and like that informs the weirdness that's going on in the sort of Brindlewood Bay, but now they're grown up, and we find out how they've changed in that time. I think that could be dynamite as well.
You think it would be like a Brindlewood Bay setup, but with kids? Or would you think about doing something like Kids on Bikes or Monster of the Week and then Brindlewood Bay?
I think actually now that you say that, I think that would be even stronger. These are all great ideas. This is a dynamite topic.
Yeah. It's like now everybody's going to be like, ooh, let me do that one for the quarterly.
Oh, yeah, I've committed myself next year to only running quarterlies.
Oh, really?
So we're going to see. Yeah, I'm going to try and do that. So that means I got 12 games I have to plan. So that's it.
Wait. How does the quarterly work again? I'm sorry. Wait, what?
So I run 3 games a week.
Okay.
And if I do that, then I can do 3 months for each. So yeah, I can get 12 games, 12 quarterlies in a year.
Oh my God, I'm going to finally be dominating the number of games played on this podcast.
Oh God.
Awesome. Mads, thank you so much for bringing that topic. That was a delight.
Yeah.
No, well, thanks to Shane for saying, I like this one. If you want my 2 cents, sure.
That's great. For our third segment, we're each going to discuss something that is lately inspiring us or giving us joy. Shane, what is giving you life?
So the silver lining on the big cloud that has been my recovery from COVID is that because I've had to cancel a lot of plans, I've had much more time for reading. And I wanted to mention my favourite book that I've read recently, definitely my favourite book of this year, which is Lapvona by Ottessa Moshfegh. It is literary fiction, but it's set in a small medieval village, and it's just about the awful people who live in this village, focused on the shepherd's son. You know, there's a local lord who's terrible, but everyone in this book is terrible. I do want to warn you that if there are any content warnings that would be a deal breaker for you, this book includes whatever that is. It is relentlessly awful, but the sort of understated, way that it tells you these incredibly horrific and distressing things is part of its humor and charm. Lots of potential NPCs you could steal for your fantasy game if that's something that you're running. So I really recommend, if that sounded good to you, I realize I'm not exactly selling it. I went from Blades in the Dark But Happy to the most distressing book you can imagine. But if that sounds like a good time, I thought it was very funny. I really recommend Lapvona.
Awesome. Mads, what is giving you life?
I had written down a bunch of stuff that I was trying to finish writing, but then a lot of good news coming out of bad news, because in October I went through a car accident and my car was totaled and all this kind of stuff. So I couldn't drive for a little bit, and it just seemed like, oh my God, are you kidding me? Why is this happening? But I was still gaming, and I was still enjoying playing with other people, finding other people to play with, and just enjoying their characters and the stories. And what has happened is that just this whole performing, doing actual plays has given me a lot of confidence in the past year, and it gave me the confidence to apply for a job that I'm highly qualified for. And I got it. So,
awesome.
Yay! I'll be starting it soon and then changing my hours, so I'll be fitting in more gaming. Oh my gosh. But I think what I'm looking forward to is having the possibility of doing more campaign stuff. I have a group that I'm in a rotation with, like we're taking turns GMing each other and introducing different games that we're interested in. So I can do that with that group. But then also thinking about some of the ideas that I've had for either doing short series or full campaign of, finishing out the Between, and then like starting a new campaign with them, and then starting a campaign of Brindlewood Bay, and then scheduling is part of my wheelhouse. So I guess I'm really digging into my wheelhouse now by trying to improve upon my facilitating skills. Trying to get more confidence in not just doing 2 shots or a short series, but seeing, hey, I can carry it through all the way from beginning to an end,
Nice.
See them through to a conclusion, either by a mastermind or the Void Mystery or whatever game it is, and then see them through these adventures. And then, again, improve my skills as I go along, because I thought I was always going to be, no, I just want to play. I don't want to run anything or whatever. But I think my players and the doing actual plays myself, it's just given me a lot of confidence in knowing that I can do this. This is not rendered difficult because, I'm not doing any crunchy games with stat blocks, because I'm not doing that anymore. I'm doing story games, indie narrative, collaborative games that I enjoy. And that's the most important thing, is to find the game system, the mechanics, the people that you enjoy playing with, and then just being able to have fun.
Awesome. I have 2 things. One is that getting out of managing the Gauntlet Twitter the day before Elon Musk took over is chef's kiss for me. But the other thing is I've been really having a good time. I've been rebuilding the Age of Ravens blog. That's a blog I ran for many years. I won an Emmy for it years ago, and I'd been doing it on the main Gauntlet blog for a while. But I've moved over to a new site, Age of Ravens Games, all one word.com. And there are a lot of really interesting tools, like really good Squarespace tools. I can bring my videos and my history of RPG lists and all of my blog posts over there and get them organized. And that has been a joy, really satisfying, even when I'm frustrated about putting a goddamn anchor on a web page. I can get it done eventually, and it works. And I'm very happy with how it's progressing. usable now. It's still under construction, but I think it's pretty dynamite, and I'm looking forward to adding more stuff to that.
Yeah, it's looking great.
Thank you. That's our show. Thank you so much for playing with us. You can check out the show notes for links about the games we discussed. You can find out more about the Gauntlet at www.gauntlet-rpg.com, where you can find articles, podcast infos, and links to our forums. You can follow us on Twitter while it lasts at Gauntlet RPG. If you're interested in playing with the Gauntlet, do check out our Patreon at patreon.com/Gauntlet. Remember, the hard part is spelling Gauntlet right. Shane, thank you so much.
Thanks, Lowell.
And Mads, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you guys so much for having me. It was a blast. I mean, for anybody playing games, I mean, this is a great community, and I'm very happy that I was able to find them, and happy to be here. So again, thank you very much for inviting me onto the podcast.
Listeners, that's our show.